American Top 40.
And now the current hit by the strange rock group who do weird things on stage to shock their audience. Sometimes it backfires, like the time they pretended to execute their leader and almost did. This particular stunt in their act always follows their performance of a song called Killer. And what's supposed to happen is this. A mock-up of a gallows is brought out, complete with a hangman's noose. The leader is led up to the platform by the other members of the group who serve as his executioners. And then after a few drum rolls, the leader is executed. But he appears again a few minutes later to finish the show. Well, it didn't happen that way at one concert they gave in New Orleans. The leader didn't finish that show. In fact, he almost took his final curtain. What happened was that when the trap was sprung, the rope broke. And instead of lowering him somewhat gently to the stage, it made him come crashing down on his knees, which put him out of action for a couple of days with severe bruises and a really bad rope burn. But he's gutsy. That hanging routine, I hear, is still part of the act. And he's also pretty gutsy to use the name that he uses. Here's Alice Cooper.
Number 7. American Top 40.
This is Casey in Hollywood, and now the latest hit by the far-out rock group who got their start by pretending to be a rock group. A few years back, as the story goes, 5 friends from Phoenix, Arizona were going to the same school, and they all went out for track and they all earned letters, which brought them to an awards banquet where everybody had to prepare a skit as part of the entertainment. Well, these 5 friends worked up an act where they pretended to be a rock and roll band. And they had to pretend because they weren't musicians. Well, they faked it pretty good and got enough of a response to make them believe they were good and that they should take themselves seriously. So they learned to play instruments, practiced a lot, and went out into the world of pop music to make a name for themselves, which they have done. But not so much on their musicianship as their showmanship. At number 26 this week, one of the most bizarre and colorful groups in the business, Alice Cooper.
American Top 40.
Now on AT40, the current hit by the kinkiest rock attraction in all the land. Their leader is Vincent Furnier, who a few years ago, when he was working on his high school newspaper, used to climb up and lie on top of the 7-foot-high filing cabinets to write his stories. Now that was just a warm-up for some of the present-day antics. And according to Time magazine, being different from the crowd has been Vince's main concern in life since he was a teenager. His sister recalled that when all the other kids were wearing jeans and t-shirts to school, Vince was wearing a tie and jacket. And then when everyone else began dressing up too, Vince went back to jeans and t-shirts. He's a master at standing out from the crowd. And you don't have to look any further than the girl's name he goes by. At number 38, here's Alice Cooper.
American Top 40.
This is Casey in Hollywood, and right now it's time for the big hit record by the unconventional, wacky pop star who uses a woman's name as his own, which creates one of the most unusual coincidences we've ever come across. 2 men in the music business, unknown to each other, and living in different centuries, using a woman's name as their own, and both men using the same woman's name, Alice. One of them, of course, is Alice Cooper, whose real name is Vincent Furnier. The other man was Septimus Winter, who composed songs under the name Alice Hawthorne, and who 120 years ago wrote Listen to the Mockingbird. But Septimus Winter was really a loser, because he sold the rights to his song for $50. And in the next half-century, that song sold 20 million copies of sheet music, and not a penny in royalties went to the composer Alice Hawthorne. This week, the other Alice, Alice Cooper, moves up a couple of positions on American Top 40 with his current hit. And you can be sure he hasn't signed away any royalties to his songs. At number 18, this is I Never Cry.
If there's a tear, American Top 40.
Well, now I have the latest hit by the only artist we know of to have 2 of his albums recalled by the federal government. It happened for the first time back in 1972 when this zany star had more than 500,000 pair of women's panties imported from England. He was getting ready to release an album titled School's Out, whose theme was teenage rebellion. And the star hoped his fans would be inspired to use the panties in the old teenage prank of flying women's lingerie like flags on car antennas. But when the panties landed in this country, they were immediately confiscated by customs agents under the federal fabric law that makes it illegal to sell highly flammable garments. The government then yanked 400,000 copies of that album containing those flammable panties off the market. And the star told us it took 3 weeks before his lawyers could reverse the order by convincing federal agents that the panties were not intended to be sold or worn. Then, just a few months later, the artist was busted again. This time, the Secret Service stopped the release of his album Billion Dollar Babies. The problem with this one was a picture on the inside cover of $1 million worth of real money, and that violated a federal law against printing color pictures of American currency. And before the government would let the star release his album, he had to reshoot that cover picture using millions of dollars in play money. So much for the case of Uncle Sam versus Alice Cooper. This week, Alice moves up to number 17 with his latest, You and Me.
When I get home from work,
American Top 40.
Now we're up to the latest hit by a superstar who recently held auditions to find a new member for his stage act. But this wasn't any ordinary audition because the rock star wasn't looking for a guitar player or a drummer or another vocalist. In fact, he wasn't looking for a human being at all, musical or otherwise. Let me read you a piece of the ad that he ran in one of the show business trade papers before the audition. It said, "No prior acting, singing, or dancing experience necessary. Any species of snake can apply, regardless of sex, nationality, or religious persuasion. Employee benefits include free hospitalization, profit sharing, Christmas bonuses, and an occasional human sacrifice, if you are the right reptile." End of quote. Well, by now you've probably figured out that the only rock star peculiar enough to run an ad or an audition like that would be Alice Cooper. Well, the final audition was held here in Los Angeles with several dozen snakes competing on the basis of charisma, poise, and musical interpretation. The judge was Nightmare Alice himself, and the winner was a lovely 9-foot lady boa constrictor named Angel, which I guess proves that here in Hollywood, even a snake's dreams can come true. This week, the current smash by the man who gave Angel her first big break in the business is up to number 10. Here's Alice Cooper with You and Me.
American Top 40.
This is Casey Kasem on American Top 40 in Hollywood. And now, let's find out whatever happened to one of the most colorful rock performers of the 1970s, a man named Alice Cooper. Alice Cooper's real name is Vincent Furnier. In his guise as Alice, Vincent created one of the weirdest rock and roll shows ever. In concert, he toured America and the world wearing bizarre makeup and his pet boa constrictor, a huge snake that was twined around his body. Scary creatures would jump out at the audience like a huge jack-in-the-box. And during a song called Welcome to My Nightmare, toy dolls would lose their heads to Alice's guillotine. In 1973, at the height of his popularity, Alice Cooper was one of the biggest concert draws ever, playing in front of nearly 1 million fans that year and grossing $17 million. He was so controversial that members of England's House of Parliament tried to have his show banned in Britain. During his career, Alice Cooper hit the top 40 10 times, but by the late 70s, Alice had a serious drinking problem, and he'd become an alcoholic. He quit touring altogether and went into a period of withdrawal, except for recording an occasional album. And where is Alice Cooper today? Well, about a year ago, he moved to Chicago to get away from the pressures of the LA music scene. He's talking about doing a sequel to his Welcome to My Nightmare album, and he's raising a family. Alice Cooper has a 3.5-year-old daughter who he told reporter Bob Green is the most important thing in his life. He said, "I spend most of every day with my daughter. I take her to Sunday school every week. That's all I really want, to be her hero." Alice Cooper, the former king of Fright Rock, still playing with dolls. A little doll he worships, his daughter. And that's whatever happened to Alice Cooper.
Casey's Top 40.
You know, a few weeks ago, a huge snake was found living under a house in Florida. These days, that snake's on a rock and roll tour with the act that's at number 12 in our countdown. You may have read about that snake, the boa constrictor that had been bought a few years ago as a pet and had vanished one day. Apparently, it crawled under the floor of a house just north of Miami, where it stayed, eating small rodents and growing bigger by the day. In time, it went from being a 1-foot-long pet to a 20-foot-long monster reptile. Well, when news of the snake came out, a number of zoos offered to take it. And it may yet wind up in a zoo. But in the meantime, the snake is going on tour with its new friend, rocker Alice Cooper. Alice is one of the founding fathers of what's been called shock rock. Over the years, he's used a number of snakes in his act, and he really wanted to perform with this one because, well, it had gotten so much publicity. So he contacted the owner and arranged to use it on stage in his current worldwide tour. Alice told us, quote, "I'll provide the snake with a job so it can earn an honest living rather than having to depend on the kindness of strangers at a zoo and the taxpayers' dollars." Alice's year-long world tour begins this week in Belgium, and he's bringing along his band, his roadies, his musical instruments, and his new snake, along with a professional snake handler, by the way, who will guarantee this 20-foot-long pet is treated properly. And while that snake slithers across the stage in Europe, Alice Cooper's latest hit crawls up 3 notches to number 12 in America. Here's something he hopes that snake is not: poison.
American Top 40.
You're tuned to the pulse of the pop world, American Top 40 and Shadoe Stevens. And now the story of how a rocker infamous for destruction and doom on stage rescued Hollywood's most famous landmark. It's the Hollywood sign, and over the years the gigantic letters aged and fell into a state of disrepair, and no one seemed to care except for Alice Cooper. Now, Alice told us in an exclusive AT40 interview, "I pretty much work out of Los Angeles and Hollywood, and I'm proud of Hollywood. It was the city's 75th anniversary, and we were going to have this big celebration, and the sign looked like a pile of trash." So Alice called the Chamber of Commerce and asked how much is each letter. Their answer? $27,000 apiece. He asked them, "Well, how much money do you have?" To which they replied, $3,000, which we've collected over a period of 10 years. So Alice told them, "Well, I'm going to buy a letter for $27,000. At least one letter up there is going to be brand new." So I bought the first O and dedicated it to Groucho Marx because he was a friend of mine. Next thing you know, Spielberg jumped in, and then Gene Autry, Hugh Hefner. All these people finally agreed that it's embarrassing to have the Hollywood sign look like that. And that's how Hollywood's most famous landmark was restored to all its glory in time for the 75th anniversary of the land of make-believe. And all thanks to the man at number 16 this week on American Top 40. With his comeback hit, Poison, here's Alice Cooper.
You're cruel.
15 more Billboard hit revelations to come as American Top 40 continues.